What is a soccer hooligan?
A broad definition would be anyone who'd be involved in soccer-related violence or disorder. And it can involve like an organized component. So you can think of organized fan groups in Europe. Often we refer to them as firms, ultras, but you find them all over the world.
I live in the United States, and as somebody who lives here, like this is something that is completely unfamiliar to me. Is this just kind of the equivalent of fans fighting in the stands at an American football game like we see here? Or is this something different?
Organized fan groups against each other, quite violent, quite extensive. It can be with the police. You might see riot police in stadiums trying to separate groups. So it can be a lot more severe than just some random people getting drunk and fighting. It can happen outside the stadiums before games, unrelated to games as well. Like groups can meet and can become violent. But so yeah, it's I think you don't have that in the US from my understanding.
Yeah, here it generally kind of tends to be people will get in a fight at a game, but it's usually because somebody was being a jerk, somebody spilled a beer on somebody else. It's not usually related to the game itself. Is hooliganism, is that more confined to like, no, this is related to the sporting event that is happening?
It is more related to the game itself and to the meaning of game. It's often also related to territory. So you have some of these football rivalries that go back hundreds of years, and they're often intertwined with political rivalries, religious rivalries. So if you think, for example, of in Scotland the Old Firm between the two Glasgow teams, like one team stands Celtic versus Rangers. That's a representation also of a religious conflict. So there's much more than it's much more than about just 90 minutes of football.
Here, when there's something that kind of breaks out before the game or in the game, it's much more isolated to just a couple of people. Is hooliganism, I guess, is that more widespread? Like it's not just Bob versus Tom. It's this group against this group.
It has a strong group component. Obviously, no one wants to back down. So football is still like, or soccer in Europe is still a very masculine environment in the stadiums as well. So there's the sort of group norms that you have about aggression, risk taking, showing dominance, values of bravery, not backing down if the other group tries to intimidate you. You and your fellow fans, you stand together, and if there's a fight happening, you don't run away.
When we talk about hooliganism slash soccer violence, like what kind of acts are we generally talking
It can be pretty much anything on a spectrum from deadly interactions. There have been stabbings. If you Google hooliganism and stabbings, you will find every year instances of fans traveling abroad and horrible things happening, sometimes deadly clashes, just fights, fist fights between fans and police, stewards, throwing objects onto pitches using fireworks. Which can lead to matches being abandoned, intimidation, hurling abuse, which can include racist abuse, which can also lead to matches being abandoned. So it's a very broad spectrum from physical violence, extreme physical violence, more into the sort of disorder, and then intimidation and harm or rule violations on the softer end of the spectrum.
I'm a big numbers person. If we were kind of going to quantify this as like a problem, 10 is the highest, 1 is the lowest. Like, where does this kind of sit in terms of a problem you're at sporting events?
That depends very much on who you're going to ask. So if and where you're going to ask that question. So there is no global trend for this sort of problem. I think every country has its own, or every region has its own status and that sort of thing. So obviously the UK is famous for its hooliganism problem in the 80s and 90s, and we've kind of gone past this a little bit. So it's much more controlled environments now, especially in the top level leagues. In other countries, there's less control, and it's much more common for things to escalate.
You know, the impression that I have, at least in the United States, and completely from movies, right, is it's this firm against this firm, and they're going to both meet outside of the stadium and stand their ground. Like, is that a real thing that happens, or is like that's movies?
Yes, I mean it is, that can happen, but it's rare. I think, especially when you talk about violence that organizers, police, and the public care about. I mean, if two rival fan groups decide to meet up in a field outside of, I don't know, the day before the game and beat the hell out of each other for, I don't know, an hour, then no one really cares. I think this actually exists, that people film themselves like meeting up and organizing these sort of battles before, but that's not really what most people, when they think about containing potential disorder and violence at games, what they think about, at least in most European countries. It can happen, so that it can happen that if there's two rival groups and one has to travel all the way to the other stadium, they have to take a certain route to the stadium with police protection, and the other fans are waiting for them near the stadium and are trying to agitate or trying to start something. Something like this can happen and happens, but then it's obviously up to the organizers to anticipate and not let it happen in the movies, where it's basically a free-for-all and everyone just goes nuts. That's kind of exactly what you want to avoid.
For the people who are in the more organized segments of this, are they also generally involved in other kind of criminal behavior? Or are they just, this guy's an accountant during the week and on Saturdays he's out there fighting outside of the stadium?
You will have both. You will have people who absolutely change when they go to football, for whom this is an outlet of things they can't do during the day job, and who you would never think that they would be part of such a group like that. And then you have obviously people, there are elements in organized football groups that have been associated with either some criminal elements or extreme political ideologies, right-wing ideologies. I think there's some clubs in Germany that have issues with that, where fan groups are under observation from the state for knowingly, I don't know, showing Nazi salutes, stuff like that. You have the same issue in Italy. There's a lot of there are fan groups who are openly fascist. Serbia, they have ultras groups who are known, who have known ties to organized crime, and you have the way you deal with that then obviously becomes a lot more tricky, and how you assess the risk, how you can manage these sort of fan groups when they clash.
How does the general public feel about this? Are they against it, or do they kind of secretly support it a little bit? Are they more just like, oh my gosh, I can't believe these guys are ruining this game? Or are they kind of like, yeah, stick it to them?
I mean, I don't think anyone likes violence. I think it's pretty much universally condoned by other fans. Having said that, up until the point where it gets violent, ultras and organized fan groups are also doing a lot for the atmosphere. So they're really important in the stadiums. They're organizing choreographies, which look amazing. They're organizing chants. They are generally responsible for a large proportion of the good atmosphere, which is something that sells as part of the product. Right? Even the organizers need people to create a good atmosphere. So it's kind of a balancing act. You know, you want there to be a prickly atmosphere in the stadium. That's amazing. That feels good. That gets you to the edge, but you obviously don't want it to then turn violent.
Are you ready for some harder / listener submitted questions?
Yeah, sure.
Where would you say that, like right now, it's the worst?
Anecdotally, you will see it in the news and you will hear the stories. So in Europe, France has had issues since COVID started. They had multiple matches abandoned due to pitch invasions, bottles thrown at players, threats of intimidation. And that usually doesn't happen in top leagues. So that has been a big issue in France. There are countries that struggle, as I mentioned earlier, like Indonesia has had issues over the last 20 years, really, with football-related violence, stabbings. But then you can find it really everywhere. Like if you Google just in Europe, at least, hooligans and stabbings, or football fans and stabbings, you will find something very quickly from last year. It's not one particular place. It's usually like intense rivalries or, yeah.
How does somebody get into a firm? Is this like a formal thing where you're accepted into it, or you just kind of go along with the crowd?
I know people who are like members of organized fan groups. You kind of have to, like, some of them are organized like clubs almost, like fan clubs. So there will be, I don't know, some sort of structure internally that's a bit more formalized. For others, it will be more, if you go to the stadium, there's a specific section where they stand. That is their section. And if you stand there, you have to either know someone or get to know someone to be allowed to stand there. So kind of like encroach on their territory and then have to kind of, yeah, you have to be accepted into the group.
What firms generally have the worst reputation?
The Balkan states in Europe have some very fierce ultras groups, and they are linked. There's a lot of national identity, a lot of direct connections to the civil wars. So people who fought in the civil wars are represented in these sort of organized fan groups. So these are people that are pretty tough. Like that's not like someone who's pretending necessarily. So if you have these sort of elements in certain groups, then you're probably a bit more wary about, interacting with maybe other fans.
Yeah, I mean, does it rise to the level in some places where you're like, oh, you better be careful going over there?
Yeah, I mean, I was just before this interview, I was just Googling out of curiosity, and there was like a news report about some Chelsea fans going for a game to Napoli, to Naples in Italy, and just wandering the city before the match day, and they ran into a group of ultras, Napoli ultras, and they got chased and stabbed. So you will, like, there are towns and there are cities and there are clubs that have a very fierce reputation, and I'm pretty sure you can do your research beforehand and maybe avoid certain areas where you know that if that's their territory.
What can we expect of the World Cup? Is this something that goes along with the World Cup, or is that like, no, it's too tightly controlled there?
I mean, it's tightly controlled. It's far away from most of the rest of the world, so it's quite a trip. It's very expensive this year as well. All aspects of it, like travel is expensive, accommodation will be expensive, tickets are ridiculously expensive. So I think they have unintentionally or intentionally priced out large portions of fans in general. Yeah, I think the risk for the World Cup would be quite low. But you still have, like, the European Championships a couple of years ago, like when away fans travel, I don't know, a couple of hours instead of 20 hours, where it's more realistic that larger groups meet, then you can still have that. But I think the World Cup in the US, similar to the World Cup in Qatar, there were no incidents there. I do not really foresee major clashes there, but who knows?